Firstly, we're talking about economic concerns, all right? Jeffrey has mentioned a little while ago that if we look at median household income and break it down according to race, you find that the Malays are earning 25% below the national average, compared to the Chinese at $5,100 and the Indians at $5,370. Now, we may think that, look, if we're talking about meritocratic society, right, that this is the result of it, because the Chinese, the Indians, they have more, they have more capability, they work harder, and that's why they earn more. Is it really that simple? We're talking about the results of financial deprivation as a result of income inequality. And I'm going to present these to you and then show you how some of these factors come back, right, to affect the ability to earn a bigger income. And then the vicious cycle it affects goes on until the disadvantage then puts the Malay community down, further down the totem pole, right? Financial deprivation exacts a toll on family and children, right? Because of financial pressure, physical, emotional factors, puts a lot of pressure on the family, leading to family breakdowns, leading to juvenile delinquency, so on. Right? It also limits the academic progress of students. I'll show you in a minute how this is actually a very major problem as well. Okay. It also leads to higher criminal behavior. If you take a look at this next statistic here, overall drug abusers captured in 2010 shows that the Malay community, Malays, are arrested and imprisoned for drug abuse. For almost 50% of them are made up of Malays, compared to the overall population here is about what, 13 to 14%. And it causes greater household debt. It also works against, in totality, it works against the whole cohesiveness of our society. Because if you're talking about wide income disparity, you can never bring society together in a cohesive whole. What we propose to do, right, in this, to be able to level up society, right, we want to implement minimum wage. It is not targeted solely at the Malay community. It is across the board at the national level. But it will help tremendously the Malay community, because the Malay community, as I said, pointed out, is just proportionately represented in the lower income groups. If we want to talk about leveling up society, minimum wage increases the spending power of low income Malay workers. Right? It reduces poverty and alienation of the Malay community. It reduces stress on family relationships that I pointed out earlier on. And it decreases dependence on welfare programs. Minimum wage is implemented in almost 99% of the countries in the world. Most recent being Hong Kong and Malaysia. They have minimum wage right now. It is high time that we have minimum wage in Singapore, so as not to put to increase our income inequality in Singapore. The other proposal that we want to put forward is retrenchment benefits. Now, at the moment, if workers are retrenched, you're out on your own, unless you have a contract with your employer that will pay you retrenchment benefits, which most Singaporean workers don't enjoy. In our proposal, what we say is that if a worker is retrenched, immediately the worker is then paid 75% of the last drawn salary for the first 6 months. If you still cannot find a job by then, your benefit is then reduced to 50% of your last drawn salary in the following 6 months. And it's further reduced to 25% in the third 6-month period. In that period, you will work with the government, the state, to actively find a job, and you can only turn down 3 reasonable job offers. This is to make it so that no one then becomes very dependent on these benefits. In other words, you're just living off the scheme without really having to find employment. But what it really does is to give the retrenched family is affected, a period that they can cope with the shock. Right? Don't forget, if someone is retrenched, your bills continue to come. Whether it's your electricity bills, your food you still need to eat, so on. So, a scheme like this will benefit the Malay community tremendously, because again, as I pointed out, most of your Malay households, and I believe it's about 20% of the Malay households, live on less than $1,500 a month. If we had such a program, you will be able to at least sustain the shock. How is this to be funded? Well, the state, the government can come in, employees together can all pool into a fund. Employed workers can all pool into the fund and then be able to run a scheme of such a nature. Let me turn to healthcare right now. If you look at 3 illnesses, obesity, I'm not sure you can see from there, high blood pressure and total high blood cholesterol, and then you break it down by ethnic group, you find that the Malays tend to register higher rates than the Chinese or the Indians. Now, some of these are due to several factors. Okay? And one of them is, of course, poverty. The poor segments of society usually indicate higher rates of medical problems. It's not because somehow they're born that way. But think about it. The poorer folks have less access to healthy dietary habits, correct? Your healthier foods, usually more expensive. You work longer hours, making sometimes exercise periods less available. And also because of when you don't have the means, especially in a system whereby our healthcare system is so expensive, people just tend to put off. They avoid screenings, treatments. I know many people who told me that sometimes just make the medication stretch. I know of at least one person, one person who told me that she was diabetic, and medication is supposed to be taken every day. Because he couldn't afford it, he stretched it out to taking it once every 3 days, so it just lasts just a little longer. Well, he ended up having his leg amputated, and this compounds the problem. Poverty, low-income groups, it also affects childbirth. Mothers who are poor and receive poor nutrition is more likely to give birth to babies of low birth weight, and this could affect the child's learning ability in later years. Children with poor nutrition, they're less alert, they're less curious, they're less able to interact. All these compound to the problem which I presented a little while ago in terms of performance, in terms of the ability to earn a higher income. What do we propose in order to overcome this problem. Again, it's not targeted solely at the Malay community, but rather at the national level. What we proposed in our national healthcare plan, it's not very hard to understand. All we need to do is scrap the 3M system: MediSave, MediShield, MediFund, in its place, and then return all your funds from your MediSave back to your CPF account so that you can use it for your retirement. Okay. In its place, what we call for is to implement a national fund, what we call the National Health Investment Fund, right, where working Singaporeans pay into this fund taken from CPF. That's about $40 a month on the average, depending on your income level. Those earning $2,000 and below, you don't pay. Right? You earn more, you pay a little bit more. But it averages out to be about $40 a month, taken from your CPF. Compare this to your MediSave you're paying right now. It's about a third, okay, what you're currently paying to your CPF account. And when you fall ill, you pay only 10% of the hospital bill, capped at $2,000 a year. Meaning that if you are unfortunate enough to be hospitalized and you fall ill and your bill comes up to say $2,000, you pay only $200. The rest of it, the NHIF will take care of. If your bill comes up to $20,000, you pay a maximum of, you pay $2,000, correct? If your bill comes up to more than that, 30, 40, 50,000, you continue paying $2,000, and NHIF will take care of the rest. Currently, with your CPF, you get hospitalized, you know that you've been through it. There are a lot of limitations, a lot of qualifications. Let me just give you an idea. Singapore spends, our nation spends about $12 billion a year on healthcare expenditure, of which the government only spends about 3.5 billion, less than 1/3, right? Our MediSave, MediFund, MediShield combined pays only a little more than $1 billion. $1 billion, government's $3.5 billion, you're talking about $4 or $5 billion. What about the rest? $6, $7 billion. Where's it coming from? A lot is coming from out-of-pocket expenses. We're paying, in fact, I think in terms of out-of-pocket expenses, we are the highest in Asia. So, a plan like this, a national healthcare plan like this, goes a long way in helping them, especially low-income groups, and in particular, as I said, pointed out, the Malay community. Let's turn our attention to education. I come back to that point about meritocracy, right? We keep thinking, it's been drilled into our heads. You work harder, you are smarter, you are rewarded more. Is that true? In a system whereby you started, everybody is generally equally poor, Singapore, think 1950s, 1960s, meritocracy would have worked very well. But as then society then economy develops, you find the upper class emerging. You get into a situation where now the rich want to entrench themselves. They have political influence, patronage, and then they build into a system whereby the system benefits them and disadvantages the poor. And then you have problems, ramifications thereafter. We pointed out earlier on some of the income, but in terms of educational level too, Walid Jumla here in this very hall pointed out in the presentation last year. He found that Malays enrolled in universities in Singapore was 5%, compared to 22% for the Chinese and 35% for Indians. Right? What we want to be able to do is to make sure that we reform our educational system, because education is a great level, okay, and it is the key to social mobility. How are we going to do that? First, we nationalized preschool system. Right now, you have PAP Community Foundation, you have NTUC, what's that, My School, right? And then you have different other more elite kindergartens, preschool systems, churches that will have their own, and then I think you have the Eton preschool, your Montessori, and so on and so on. We're talking about huge range. But because primary 1 students, when they enter the classroom, they are already expected at a certain level in terms of numeracy and literacy. What we want to do is to get MOE to step in and say preschool, MOE runs it. Okay? Qualified teachers to be able to take students through their preschool years. So we want to nationalize preschool. It is important because Harvard University did some research and they concluded that, and quote, children who develop warm, positive relationships with their kindergarten teachers are more excited about learning, more positive about coming to school, more self-confident, and achieve more in the classroom. And if you don't have this, your foundation is already not steady. Next, we want to make our scholarships award system more transparent. You know, when we were doing this research, we examined the record of scholarships that are awarded by Public Service Commission. You know, the PSC. They identify pre-university students, and then they group them, promising students, and then they group them through the years, sponsor their university education, and then when they're done, they pull them into public service, and then get them into high senior positions within the public service, right? Your right from Lee Hsien Loong, Teo Chee Hian, George Yeo, to your MRT guy, what's his name? Desmond Quek, Ng Boon Ye, Peter Lim. They all, I think, they all rose from the ranks early on. Now, when we did a survey, we found that out of 380 students who were awarded PSC scholarships from 2009 to 2013, only 6 were Malay. Do a quick calculation and that's about 1.6%. Now, more disturbingly, PSC then says in one of its circulars, says that PSC candidates must, and I quote, must refrain from participating in activities which are or are likely to be inimical to the interests or security of Singapore, unquote. When you look at this statement here, it opens the question to what is inimical to the interests or security of Singapore. And as I will present to you later on, what Jie Jufree just now alluded to, you have problems when your government leaders have openly stated that the Malay community is suspect, the loyalty to Singapore is suspect. When you take into consideration into what PSC has stated, you do have to ask the question, is this policy, does it come into play in terms of selecting your Malay students for PSC scholarships? From PSC scholarships, they select and award presidential scholarships. Of the 228 scholars from 1966 to 2000 and I believe it's 2010, there were 228 president scholars, of which 2 are Malay. One was awarded just last year, and the other one dated back as far back as 1960, in 1968. Now, all these public scholars, they are groomed, as I said, to serve in public service, right? And then they go through the ranks and they occupy senior civil service positions. So we did a check of permanent secretaries and deputy permanent secretaries, and we found that of the 50 or more positions, none of them were Malay. And if we look at the PMO, the Prime Minister's office, all your senior civil servants assisting the ministers and so on, again, none of them were Malays. Now, what we want to do is to make sure that the scholarship award is transparent. Okay? And first and foremost, the government must come out and reiterate that it does not put in any discriminatory practices in the selection of scholars. Next point that I want to talk about is your SAP schools, Special Assistance Plan schools. Right? The SAP schools, SAP schools, are basically they identify very high-performing students and groom them in these schools here, so that they can imbibe the Chinese ethos, culture, values, and through the study of the Chinese language. That's very important. I believe the Malays also want to be able to get a good grounding in their own culture, in their own language. The problem with SAP schools is that because it is so restricted to only Chinese students, and they get the very the creme de la creme, if you will, and then they groom them for high positions. They function almost on a daily basis, if you will. You go to school, you see only Chinese fellow students, and then you get into positions of authority. You find that they find it very hard to relate, and they don't understand, they're not sensitive, right, to some of the customs, if you will, the practices, the norms, the mores of the other ethnic groups. So what we're proposing is to expand. It must go on, right? But we wanted to see it expanded so that they can take in students from other ethnic minorities, so that at least we can build this culture when they're from student days, and be able to cultivate our national identities. But slowly, as I understand it, madrasa schools have now moved on to want to get into more the mainstream educational system. I think the first cohort of madrasa students will be taking their PSLE next year. Right?
No, they have taken PSLE.
They're taking another enter secondary one in O levels in next year. Right? Now with such they're moving towards the mainstream educational system, yet they are not funded. And what we're saying is that let us make it consistent with the rest of the government-aided schools, the missionary schools, St. Patrick's and Andrews, ACS, and so on and so forth, right? And provide state funding for some of these madrasa schools that have gone mainstream as well, right? And in return, then some of these madrasa schools must then accept teachers who are non-Muslims teaching secular subjects. And what we want to also do is to lower TTFS qualification. Tertiary tuition fund scheme is open to Malay students, right, of poorer family background. They cannot afford tuition fees for the children. But I don't want to belabor this point, because what we're going to do is we're studying our educational system, and the paper will be presented very in the near future. We want to advocate a lowering of tertiary fees as well. And by that time, if we actually do that, we may have come to a point where we may not require TTFS, right? Education becomes affordable across the board for all students. So we'll leave that to our paper, our forthcoming paper. Let me then move on and show you this chart over here. If you're talking about meritocracy, this is a very interesting finding. We took the medical annual that was published about, I think they call it 100 years studying, charting the progress of the medical community from 1910 to 2010. And there was a whole list of medical graduates, medical doctors on the last few pages of the annual. And we did a count, right, of how many medical graduates were Malays. And what we found was that, say, between 1910 to circa late 1950s, early 1960s, look at this trend here. Right after the early 1960s, the number of graduates dropped very suddenly, right, and very clearly too. Why was this what brought about such a statistic? These are things that I think we've got to look into, other than keep pointing to the fact that perhaps maybe the Malays are less capable, and therefore this is the result that you get. Now, let's turn our attention to firstly, SAF. This is a very sensitive topic, but I think it's a very important issue that we talk about in this paper. In 1987, Lee Hsien Loong said, and I quote, "If there is a conflict in the SAF, if the SAF is called to defend the homeland, we do not want to put any of our soldiers in a difficult position where his emotions for the nation may be in conflict with his religion," end quote. Lee Kuan Yew was even more explicit. He said, "If, for instance, you put in a Malay officer who is very religious and who has family ties in Malaysia in charge of a machine gun unit, that's a very tricky business. We've got to know his background. I'm saying these things because they are real, and if I don't think that, and I think even if today the Prime Minister doesn't think carefully about this, I and my family would have a tragedy." And then in 2011, he said, Lee Kuan Yew said, "We've got friendly neighbors? Grow up. There is this drive to put us down because we are interlopers," he said, and he was referring to Malaysia and Indonesia's efforts to undermine Singapore's port businesses. This is where I think many of the policies become crystallized. You have a government that thinks, that mistrusts, that doesn't trust the Malays in the SAF and in positions where security might come in. Where does it leave us as a nation? Think about it. Where does it leave us as a nation? If in a time of crisis, be it social, be it economic, be it worse, political, if we cannot depend on 13.5% of our population, what's going to happen? And we have our guns pointed at Malaysia. Let's not be bashful about it. Lee Kuan Yew has made it very clear. If you have a situation like this, and we think we can handle it by making sure that the Malay community is not involved in armed forces, is that a realistic outlook? What are you going to do? Get all 400,000 of our Malays and intern them like what the Americans did to the Japanese? And then fight the war? Jeffrey pointed out a little while ago, we have many Malaysian Chinese here. If we start attacking Malaysia, what's going to happen to the Malaysian Chinese here? They've still got family and friends, relatives. I keep asking the question, is such a policy realistic? Or should we not be thinking of how we can build trust and loyalty from our Malay community? Jeffrey read to you Suara Musyawarah's finding a little while ago, and this committee was not some radical wing of some group that's come up with a statement. It was appointed by none other than Dr. Yaakob Ibrahim, right? And the committee actually came up with this statement and said, "It is clear that the Malay Muslim community has a strong sense of belonging to Singapore. For some, this is due to a sense of history and heritage. For others, especially the young, this is a given. They have grown up in this country, and many of their experiences from school to national service are shared with other Singaporeans." I might also want to point out this fact that it was told to me that when separation came, Malaysia actually offered many of our Malay Singaporeans to cross the causeway and resettle them. Many of our Malay Singaporeans didn't do that and chose to remain in Singapore because they thought they were Singaporeans and their roots, and friends and family were all here. So what are we going to do? You have this, as I said, the vicious cycle. The more we don't trust our Malay community, the more disloyal they don't feel integrated in this community. And we have a crisis. They don't react. They don't feel that they're wanted. They don't feel that they're part of this Singaporean community. And then that disloyalty then is even more manifest. We've got to think carefully through this. All these personnel to the different vocations, whether it's the military, whether it's Air Force, whether it's SAF itself, to be based on performance itself, not on any other consideration, especially racial ones. Next, we want to talk about discrimination in the workplace. This is a very difficult subject. We know that many employers actually will decide on one candidate or an applicant or another, not based on race. But because sometimes the ethnic minority feels that they have not gotten the position, they will just scream discrimination. This is something which we've got to look into, but it is important nonetheless that we really think of it is high time that we think of a Fair Employment Act. I think the Ministry of Employment, the Ministry of Manpower has also said that they are willing to look into this issue. And what we propose, that an act like this should include the following points. First, we must identify and eliminate employment barriers against persons of certain groups, including race. Eliminate practices that require job applicants to identify their race, language, or religion unless demonstrably necessary. Then we must prohibit employees from acquiring language skills of potential employees when there is no necessity to do so. We must establish a tribunal to ensure that such complaints are adjudicated. Next, we need to talk about the racial quota when it comes to housing, and that's all encapsulated under the Ethnic Integration Program. Right now you have thresholds. More than the Malay, for example, community must not have in any one housing estate more than 22-23%, correct? And this is where I think it presents a lot of problems, economic ones especially. Think for a moment. If, for example, you wanted to sell a flat, resell a flat, and you're only able to sell it to a Malay family, your options are limited, aren't they? Compared to, say, a Chinese who wants to resell the flat. You've got the PRC Chinese able to do that. They're coming with loads of cash. So that it's an economic problem as well. The other situation is that we keep thinking, I don't know whose idea this is. I think we probably can guess. Right? This whole idea that somehow, because we look alike, because we speak alike, because of our skin color, we want to live together in the same block, in the same community, same estate. I really think that that's just some outdated thinking. Nowadays, folks want to live near where the children go to school for ease, isn't it? They want to live where their jobs are. They want to live where their parents, where they're close to their parents. And you're not going to work in Changi Airport and then stay because there's a community, a Malay community in Tuas, and then find that it's just not rational. Okay? And what we've advocated is to abolish the EIP. Singaporeans have the freedom to live where they choose. By forcing people to live next to each other, and then every now and then they'll come and take the lift together, right? Bump into each other and lift landing. We feel that we have this racial harmony. That's quite far-fetched. Housing. 98% of Malays live in HDB flats. National average about what, 85%, right? Of these, 33% live in 1, 2, 3-room flats. If you don't have to take a survey, you come for a walk about with us, you see it. You go to 3-room flats, you see plenty of Malay households. Go up to 4-room flats, go up to 5-room flats, not to mention it. You'd be lucky if you find 1, 2 Malay households. It's very stark. You see it. Now, what we'd say, and you have to create this problem right now because the high housing prices right now. You have many Malay families, not just exclusive of Malays, all right? You have many families who find themselves homeless. What do we advocate? Implement the SDP's housing plan. What is the SDP's housing plan in a nutshell? What we're saying is that introduce a scheme, non-open market flats, NOM, whereby HDB sells to us flats that does not include cost of land. In other words, what the contractor, what the government pays for in administrative fees and architect fees, your every brick, the copper wiring, the glass and everything that goes into the cost of the flat, sell it to us at cost without including cost of land. We worked out your average flat, then depending again on size of the flat, will cost about $150,000. 4-room flat, compared to what? That's about double the price that we have now presently, right? $300,000 to $400,000 4-room flat. Okay, under the scheme, right? What the government does is then if you don't have to pay that much, it means that you have more in your CPF, and when you retire, you will have enough to live on. And you'll be able to take the money out for your retirement or to invest in your children's education or to start up a new business. But that money need not be stuck and paid to the HDB and to the government. What we've also advocated is that people who now own the currently owned flats be allowed to convert their flats. Stay where they are in that same flat, but convert its status right now. All right? Change it to an NOM flat. What the government then return to you, that difference between your purchase price and the NOM flat price. Again, you take that money goes back into your CPF for your later use. It is not stuck with the government. Right? But for those who want to continue to play the housing market, you continue to buy OM flats, right, at prevailing prices, and then you can sell it later, depending on the market. You may make a loss, you may make a profit, but there you go. You have at least a choice for Singaporeans, and especially for the lower income groups, where they don't have to fork out so much money just to buy a flat. The last topic that I want to turn to is Malay organizations. Right? What we want to do is propose that Mendaki be made non-partisan. Right now, Mendaki board of directors and managers chaired by the Minister for Muslim Affairs, Dr. Yaakob Ibrahim, right? And the board is also packed with staff, with Malay MPs. What we want is take out the political element, make it non-partisan. And then we also want to propose that we introduce a committee for Singaporeans, Committee of Singaporeans for Singaporeans, whereby this committee will look into the needs of the various ethnic groups, right, and allocate resources according to need, rather than by race. Okay, right now we have all the self-help groups, Mendaki, SINDA, you have CDAC. You have this problem whereby because of the size of the population, the funding, right, is also disproportionate. Right? It doesn't help the situation, because what we want to is then for the MCYS, it needs to look into its social spending, and then for the state to help according to need rather than by race. And then there's also one rather unknown entity in Singapore. It's called the Presidential Commission for Minority Rights. How many of you have heard it? But really, I don't know what it does. It says here that its function is to draw attention to any bill or subsidiary legislation that contains differentiating measures, and to consider and report on matters affecting any racial or religious community that are referred to the Council by Parliament or the government. I don't know, I haven't heard or seen anything coming up from this group called CMR. What we're advocating is have a reform of this, whereby the president appoints the group, some of the members of this group here, but they have to go through a parliamentary confirmation process, and this group then is accountable to Parliament, so that the reports are all publicized and they know what we know what they are doing behind the scenes. Okay. Now, I'm going to leave it as that, and just want to highlight this point again of what Jeffrey said. This is not a communal problem. If we continue to take it as such, we will rue the day where we haven't been more active in trying to see how we can integrate the Malay community more into the national community. Okay. That is a must. It is so important for us. I know what the PAP government has been doing, and that it's any time that you have a discussion, confine it to AMP, confine it to Mendaki. But the Chinese, the Indians, don't know what's going on. And if we don't know what's going on, how do we understand your problems? And if we don't understand your problems, how do we help as a national community? And why do you call ourselves Singaporeans if we are unable to attend to one another's problems? That is the crux of this paper. And we want to reiterate this point, that the Singaporean identity is under attack with the influx of foreigners. It's being diluted. And it is important that when we talk about the Singaporean identity, we grew up with the Chinese, the Malays, the Indians, and the other subcultures all coming together in a unique blend, unique mix of what we've come to know and love as the Singaporean culture. That must be maintained. And the only way that we can do that is to reach across and make sure that we bring in, to make sure we level up society and bring the Malay community into the national culture and national identity. Thank you very much.